Hola! Picture this. You're at home in your room playing video games. You hear a knock at the front door of your apartment. You're not expecting anyone, so you consider just ignoring it. It's not stopping though, and it sounds agitated, even angry. Maybe it's important, so you decide you should go check it out. As you're walking to the door, the knocking keeps getting more and more frantic. You say, "Hold on, I'm coming, who is it?" The knocking continues. "Give me a second," you yell, but you hear no response. The knocking continues until you get to the door, at which point it stops. Before opening the door, you look through the peephole. You can't see anyone. "Hello, is anyone there? Do you need help?" You call out, but there's no response. You decide to open the door to see if there's anyone out there. Nothing. The hallway outside your apartment is empty. You think maybe they just got tired of waiting and left. So you go back inside, lock the door, and head back to your room. "Huh, that's weird," you murmur to yourself as you notice the door to your room is closed. You try opening it, but it seems to be locked. Your heart starts racing, but you try to reason that it's not impossible for you to have accidentally put the lock on and for the wind to have closed the door. A noise coming from inside your room catches your attention. It almost sounds like there is a conversation going on in there. You think maybe it's coming from your computer, but you can't make it out. So you press your head against the door, trying to hear what it is or where it's coming from. Suddenly, the door bursts open. The loud noise and the sudden movement of it causes you to jump back and fall to the floor. Too shocked and frightened to get up, you can see someone standing in front of you. But you can't see their face, you're too scared to even look up. So you can only see up to their stomach. But you recognize the clothes. You call out to them, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" You hear nothing back. You can feel they're staring at you. "What do you want?" you yell, but you receive no response. Finally, you breathe in, you gather your courage, and look at their face. It's you. A doppelganger is a type of wraith which takes the form of the double of a living person. This particular entity has roots in German folklore. However, the concept of a spiritual double is found throughout human history and culture. Doppelgänger is a composite German word, literally meaning double walker. The first known use of the word is in the form of Doppelgänger in the 1796 novel Siebenkees by German romantic writer Jean Paul, where the word is defined as the name for people who see themselves. The word doppelgänger also appears in the novel, but Paul defines it differently. In the description of a wedding banquet, in the first chapter, the food is so delicious and abundant that not only was one course served, but also a second, a doppelgänger. The German word gang can mean a walk, but also course, as in the course of a meal. So, according to Jean Paul, when a meal has two courses in which the first and second come together, this is known as a doppelgänger. So yeah, definitely not as chilling as the meaning with which we know the word nowadays. As mentioned before, the concept of a living person's spiritual double is not new at all, and before English speakers adopted the word doppelganger to refer to this concept, the term fetch was used instead. In Irish folklore, a fetch is a supernatural double or an apparition of a living person, the sighting of which is regarded as an omen, usually for impending death. This death omen effect has also been applied to the doppelganger, with many people believing that for those who glance at their doppelganger, death will come soon after. An American journalist and editor named Noah Brooks, who was close friends with former US President Abraham Lincoln, wrote a book called Washington in Lincoln's Time, where he claimed that he heard the following story directly from Lincoln. "It was just after my election in 1860, when the news had been coming in thick and fast all day, and there had been a great hurrah, boys, so that I was well tired out, and went home to rest, throwing myself down on a lounge in my chamber. Opposite where I lay was a bureau with a swinging glass upon it, and looking in that glass I saw myself reflected nearly at full length, but my face, I noticed, had two separate and distinct images, the tip of the nose of one being about 3 inches from the tip of the other. I was a little bothered, perhaps startled, and got up and looked in the glass, but the illusion vanished. On lying down again, I saw it a second time, plainer, if possible, than before, and then I noticed that one of the faces was a little paler, say 5 shades, than the other. I got up, and the thing melted away, and I went off, and in the excitement of the hour forgot all about it. Nearly, but not quite, for the thing would once in a while come up and give me a little pang as if something uncomfortable had happened. When I went home again that night, I told my wife about it, and a few days afterward I made the experiment again, when, sure enough, the thing came again, but I never succeeded in bringing the ghost back after that, though I once tried very industriously to show it to my wife, who was somewhat worried about it. She thought it was a sign that I was to be elected to a second term of office, and that the paleness of one of the faces was an omen that I should not see life through the last term. The modern concept of the word doppelganger was popularized thanks to English novelist Catherine Anne Crowe's 1848 book, The Night Side of Nature, where she wrote, "There must be a few persons who have not heard among their friends and acquaintance instances of what is called a wraith. That is, that in the moment of death a person is seen in a place where bodily he is not. I believe the Scotch use this term also in the same sense as the Irish word fetch, which is a person's double seen at some indefinite period previous to his death, of which such an appearance is generally supposed to be a prognostic. The Germans express the same thing by the word doppelgänger." English poet John Donne claimed to have seen a vision of his wife in 1612 in Paris on the same night as the unfortunate stillbirth of their daughter. This account appears for the first time in English writer Isaac Walton's 1675's Lives of John Donne, where he writes, "2 days after their arrival there, Mr. Donne was left alone in that room in which Sir Robert and he and some other friends had dined together. To this place Sir Robert returned within half an hour, and as he left, so he found Mr. Donne, but in such an ecstasy, and so altered as to his looks, as amazed Sir Robert to behold him, insomuch that he earnestly desired Mr. Donne to declare what had befallen him in the short time of his absence, to which Mr. Donne was not able to make a present answer, but after a long and perplexed pause, did at last say, 'I have seen a dreadful vision since I saw you. I have seen my dear wife pass twice by me through this room, with her hair hanging about her shoulders, and a dead child in her arms. This I have seen since I saw you.' To which Sir Robert replied, 'Sure, sir, you have slept since I saw you, and this is the result of some melancholy dream, which I desire you to forget, for you are now awake.' To which Mr. Donne's reply was, 'I cannot be surer that I now live, than that I have not slept since I saw you. And I am as sure that at her second appearance she stopped and looked me in the face and vanished.' Rest and sleep had not altered Mr. Donne's opinion the next day, for he then affirmed this vision with a more deliberate and so confirmed a confidence that he inclined Sir Robert to a faint belief that the vision was true. It is truly said that desire and doubt have no rest, and it proved so with Sir Robert, for he immediately sent a servant to Drury House with a charge to hasten back and bring him word whether Mrs. Donne was alive, and if alive, in what condition she was as to her health. The 12th day, the messenger returned with this account, that he had found and left Mrs. Donne very sad and sick in her bed, and that after a long and dangerous labor she had been delivered of a dead child. And upon examination, the abortion proved to be the same day and about the very hour that Mr. Donne affirmed he saw her pass by him in his chamber. According to ancient Egyptian creation myths, the god Atum used magic to create the world out of chaos. Since the earth was created with magic, it was believed that the world, as well as everything in it, was imbued with magic. And that when humans were created, that magic took the form of the soul, an eternal force which resided in and with every human. This force was encompassed by multiple parts, the amount varying from 5 parts to more, from the Old Kingdom to the New Kingdom, but most ancient Egyptian funerary texts reference these parts. Kahet, the physical body, Sa, the spiritual body, Ren, the name or identity, Ba, the personality, Ip, the heart, Shuyet, the shadow, Sekhem, the power or form, and Ka, the double or vital essence. The ka is what distinguishes a living person from a dead one, as death occurs when the ka leaves the body. It was believed that Khum created the bodies of children on a potter's wheel and placed them within their mothers' bodies. Then, depending on the region, either Meskachenet or Heket would create and breathe each person's ka into them at the moment of their birth. This would give them life. The ka was sometimes represented in Egyptian iconography as a second image of the pharaoh, leading earlier works to attempt to translate ka as double. In the Old Kingdom private tombs, artwork depicted a double world with people and objects important to the owner of the ka. On August 15th of 1822, English novelist Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, the creator of Frankenstein, wrote a letter in which she relayed her husband, English poet Percy Bysshe Shelley's claims to her that he had met his own doppelganger in June 23rd, a week after Mary's nearly fatal miscarriage, and 3 weeks before drowning in the Bay of Spezia near Lerici in Italy. In the letter, she wrote, "I think it was the Saturday after my illness. While yet unable to walk, I was confined to my bed. In the middle of the night, I was awoke by hearing him scream and come rushing into my room. I was sure that he was asleep and tried to waken him by calling on him, but he continued to scream, which inspired me with such a panic that I jumped out of bed and ran across the hall to Mrs. W's room, where I fell through weakness, though I was so frightened that I got up again immediately. She let me in, and Williams went to S, who had been wakened by my getting out of bed. He said that he had not been asleep, and that it was a vision that he saw that had frightened him, but as he declared that he had not screamed, it was certainly a dream and no waking vision. What had frightened him was this. He dreamt that, lying as he did in bed, Edward and Jane came into him. They were in the most horrible condition, their bodies lacerated, their bones starting through their skin, the faces pale yet stained with blood. They could hardly walk, but Edward was the weakest, and Jane was supporting him. Edward said, 'Get up, Shelley, the sea is flooding the house, and it's all coming down.' S got up, he thought, and went to his window that looked on the terrace and the sea, and thought he saw the sea rushing in. Suddenly, his vision changed, and he saw the figure of himself strangling me. That had made him rush into my room, yet fearful of frightening me, he dared not to approach the bed. When my jumping out awoke him, or as he phrased it, it caused his vision to vanish. All this was frightful enough, and talking it over the next morning, he told me that he had had many visions lately. He had seen the figure of himself, which met him as he walked on the terrace and said to him, 'How long do you mean to be content?' Not very terrific words, and certainly not prophetic of what has occurred. But Shelley had often seen these figures when ill. But the strangest thing is that Mrs. W saw him. Now Jane, though a woman of sensibility, has not much imagination and is not in the slightest degree nervous, neither in dreams or otherwise. She was standing one day, the day before I was taken ill, at a window that looked on the terrace with Trelawney. It was day. She saw as she thought Shelley pass by the window, as he often was then, without a coat or jacket. He passed again, now as he passed both times the same day, and as from the side towards which he went each time, there was no way to get back except past the window again, except over a wall 20 feet from the ground. She was struck at seeing him pass twice, and looked out, and seeing him no more, she cried, 'Good God, can Shelley have leapt from the wall? Where can he be gone?' 'Shelley?' said Trelawney. 'No Shelley has passed.' 'What do you mean?' Trelawney says that she trembled exceedingly when she heard this, and proved indeed that Shelley had never been on the terrace, and was far off at the time she saw him. Even more interesting is this passage we can find in Percy Shelley's drama Prometheus Unbound, which was published in 1820, 2 years before his death. He wrote, "They shall be told. Ere Babylon was dust, the Magus Zoroaster, my dead child, met his own image walking in the garden. That apparition, soul of man, he saw. For know, there are two worlds of life and death, one that which thou beholdest, but the other is underneath the grave, where do inhabit the shadows of all forms that think and live till death unite them, and they part no more. Dreams and the light imaginings of men, and all that faith creates or love desires. Terrible, strange, sublime, and beauteous shapes. There thou art, and dost hang, a writhing shade, mid whirlwind-peopled mountains, All the gods are there, and all the powers of nameless worlds, vast sceptered phantoms. Heroes, men, and beasts, and Demogorgon, a tremendous gloom, and he, the supreme tyrant, on his throne of burning gold. Son, one of these shall utter the curse which all remember. Call at will thine own ghost, or the ghost of Jupiter, Hades, or Typhon, or what mightier gods from all prolific evil, since the ruin have sprung, and trampled on my prostrate sons. Ask, and they must reply. So the revenge of the Supreme may sweep through vacant shades, as rainy wind through the abandoned gate of a fallen palace. In some Muslim countries, there exists the concept of a Qareen, which is a spiritual double of a human, as part of the human or as a parallel version of them from another dimension of existence. The word Qareen means friend, consort, or companion. Due to its ghostly nature, the Qareen could be considered a jinn, but it's distinct enough to be part of a different genus. The Qareen can be either a malevolent or benevolent entity, but most often it is associated with evil spirits tempting one into sin. The word Qareen appears in the Quran, but never in any form that could mean anything other than an earthly companion like a friend. According to the 5th volume of the Encyclopedia of the Quran, the root of the word Qareen connotes the idea of a double. This human double, companion or twin spirit, takes life upon the birth of a human being. A tradition is recorded in which every human has a Qareen and an angel, inciting evil and good respectively. While not necessarily an evil spirit in the pre-Islamic period, in which the word Qareen referred to a spirit who would follow a poet and inspire their work, this entity changed within the monotheistic orientation of Islam to a kind of demon who leads humans into temptation. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who is regarded as the greatest and most influential writer in the German language, wrote about an encounter with his doppelganger near the end of the 11th book of his autobiography, Dichtung und Wahrheit, Poetry and Truth. He wrote, "Amid all this pressure and confusion, I could not fail to see Frederica once more. Those were painful days, the memory of which has not remained with me. When I reached her hand from my horse, the tears stood in her eyes, and I felt very uneasy. I now rode along the footpath towards Rosenheim, and here one of the most singular forebodings took possession of me. I saw, not with the eyes of the body, but with those of the mind, my own figure coming towards me, on horseback, and on the same road, attired in a dress which I had never worn. It was pike grey, hecht grau, with somewhat of gold. As soon as I shook myself from this dream, the figure had entirely disappeared. It is strange, however, that 8 years afterwards, I found myself on the very road, to pay one more visit to Frederica, in the dress of which I had dreamed, and which I wore not from choice, but by accident. However it may be with matters of this kind generally, this strange illusion in some measure calmed me at the moment of parting. The pain of quitting forever the noble Alsace, with all that I had gained in it, was softened, and having at last escaped the excitement of a farewell, I found myself on a peaceful and quiet journey, pretty well recovered." That story is actually one of the few ones where the sighting of a doppelganger doesn't end with someone dying, which is kinda nice, I think. I'm not exactly what this apparition means, really. He just saw it and remembered it and felt calm. Not sure why, but at least it didn't forebode his death. Heuroscopy is a term that can be found in psychiatry and neurology. It's described as the multimodal reduplicative hallucination of one's own person. This can be the result of epilepsy, schizophrenia, etc. There's an interesting case of this condition in the Journal of Neurology, Neurosurgery, and Psychiatry from July 1994, where a 21-year-old man who developed complex partial seizures at age 15 tried to commit suicide during a heuroscopic episode. The journal reads, "The heuroscopic episode, which is of special interest to the topic of this report, occurred shortly before admission. The patient stopped his phenytoin medication, drank several glasses of beer, stayed in bed the whole of the next day, and in the evening he was found mumbling and confused below an almost completely destroyed large bush just under the window of his room on the 3rd floor. At the local hospital, thoracic and pelvic contusions as well as multiple bruises were noted. The patient was in a postictal confusion state and reacted with pain to manipulation of the spine and the right foot, but radiologically there were no fractures. The patient gave the following account of the episode. On the respective morning, he got up with a dizzy feeling. Turning around, he saw himself still lying in bed. He became angry about this guy who I knew was myself and who would not get up and thus risked being late at work. He tried to wake the body in the bed first by shouting at it, then by trying to shake it and then repeatedly jumping on his alter ego in the bed. The lying body showed no reaction. Only then did the patient begin to be puzzled about his double existence and became more and more scared by the fact that he could no longer tell which of the two he really was. Several times, his bodily awareness switched from the one standing upright to the one still lying in bed. When in the lying in bed mode, he felt quite awake but completely paralyzed and scared by the figure of himself bending over and beating him. His only intention was to become one person again, and looking out the window from where he could still see his body lying in bed, he suddenly decided to jump out in order to stop the intolerable feeling of being divided in two. At the same time, he hoped that this really desperate action would frighten the one in bed and thus urge him to merge with me again. The next thing he remembers is waking up in pain in the hospital. Austrian neurologist Sigmund Freud wrote about the doppelganger from a psychological point of view. Freud believed that the idea of the doppelganger, or the double as he referred to it, first came from the immense self-love and narcissism, which is common within the mind of children, as in that of primitive humans. And that when this stage is left behind, the double takes on a different aspect. From having been an assurance of immortality, he becomes the ghastly harbinger of death. Freud makes the claim that the idea of the double doesn't disappear with the passing of the years and the vanishing of the childish narcissism, since it can receive new meaning from the later stages of development of the ego. Inhuman Remains, a story which is part of Books of Blood, a series of anthologies created by English writer Clive Barker between 1984 and 1985, we follow a male prostitute named Gavin. Gavin is superficial and vain, often describing his own beauty in a lot of detail. At the beginning of the story, Gavin inspects his body for signs of venereal diseases, of which he is very careful. But as he inspects, he can't help but admire how beautiful his body is. Early in the story, Gavin complains about a toothache, and thinks about how he could just go to the dentist's office and only by smiling at the receptionist, he'd be able to be seen by the dentist without any need for a prior appointment. Gavin also notes that he's indifferent with his clients, claiming that this indifference is part of his charm, how people like the fact that they can be done with him and then just say bye and that's it. But Gavin wishes that he could stop being subjected to those half-hour gigs. He'd hoped to go from street hustler to gigolo to kept boy and finally to husband. Perhaps he could marry one of those many widows that look for him for comfort. But the problem to him was that these rich blooms needed a lot of tending, and the pity of it was that so many of them perished before they came to fruit. And Gavin is not immortal. He calculates the odds against him as he watches the lines deepen around his wonderful mouth. He started hustling on the streets when he was 17, but Gavin is now 24 years and 5 months old, and he'd hoped to have either married a widow or found a more legitimate occupation by the time he was 25. But so far, no luck. One very cold night, Gavin meets a man in his 50s, Kenneth Reynolds, who is interested in his services and invites him to his apartment. The place had many displays, full of antiquities. Gavin and Ken get to talking and drinking, and Gavin is actually having kind of a good time, but their conversation is cut short by some noise, which Gavin describes as a drummer in an oven beating as he burns. Ken tells him not to worry, that the sound is coming from the upstairs neighbors. However, Gavin could tell that this was a lie, since the noise was very obviously coming from somewhere else in the apartment. After Ken excuses himself and leaves the room, Gavin begins thinking about how he had experienced bad scenes before, from men who wanted to beat him for a prize to lovers who appeared at inappropriate moments. But so far, Ken didn't seem so bad, so Gavin decides to calm down and keep drinking. Besides, the noise had stopped. Maybe it was the upstairs neighbors. After all, there was no sign of Ken moving around the apartment. Gavin continues to look at the antiquities, finding one of them very interesting, and as he was pondering on the significance of it, the noise resurfaced, more frenzied than ever. Now Gavin could tell with certainty, it's not coming from upstairs, the sound is coming from somewhere in the apartment, no more than a few meters away from him. So Gavin decides to go looking for Ken outside the room, but as he steps into the dark hallway and closes the door behind him, the noise stops. Gavin calls for Ken's name, but the word seems to die at his lips. Gavin calls for Ken's name again, and this time there is a response. A moan, and the sound of a body rolling or being rolled over. Wanting to help, Gavin starts looking for Ken. He finds a door with a bloody handprint smeared on it. Ken is in there, and he seems badly hurt. He tries to get Gavin to get out of his apartment, but Gavin is determined to help. While looking for bandages to help Ken, Gavin ends up in the bathroom where he finds a statue of a sleeping figure in the bathtub. Gavin is pretty transfixed on the statue. As he's inspecting it, he hears Ken, who is now standing behind him at the bathroom door, telling him to forget he ever saw it. They argue about what happened, but eventually Gavin leaves the apartment. The next day, Gavin tries to see a dentist about that toothache he's been dealing with, expecting to coax the girl at the desk into giving him an instant appointment, but to no avail, which frustrates Gavin. This day, a pursuit began. Gavin was used to being chased by admirers before, but never quite like this. There was no evidence that someone was following him, but he could feel, every time he glanced around, that someone was hiding from his sight. Or that while walking on a night street another person was keeping pace with him, matching every step. One morning, the woman who lives on the landing below Gavin asked him who his visitor was. The funny one who came in late at night and waited on the stairs hour after hour, watching his room. Gavin hadn't had any visitors, nor did he know anyone who'd fit the description. Another day, Gavin is confronted by a pimp, claiming that Gavin had hurt one of his boys. Gavin denied this, but the pimp says that the boy recognized his attacker as Gavin. The pimp and his men intend on disfiguring Gavin, starting by cutting his face from his chin to his ear. Before they can do more damage though, the pimp and most of his men are brutally murdered. While looking at his savior, Gavin realizes that what he's looking at is the statue he saw at Kenneth Reynolds' apartment. The statue caresses Gavin's face, saying, "We're going to have a scar." Gavin recognizes its voice and is very shaken by it. The statue then moves its hand to its own face, slowly transforming it into Gavin's. This thing then admits to having washed in the blood of the boy it hurt, claiming that it needs it. The statue tells Gavin that he should leave this place. After this incident, Gavin is forced to leave his life behind, as when he goes back to his apartment, the police have confiscated all his possessions and are now looking for him. And so Gavin goes on hiding. He pays a visit to Ken, from whom he doesn't really get any information on how to prevent the statue from taking his life, but he does learn that the statue was found near Carlisle, England, and that it was found lying in a bathhouse, curled up into a ball beside the remains of an adult male, probably a fight to the death that ended in a stalemate. While hiding out, away from his life, mostly locked in an apartment, the statue paid a couple of visits to Gavin. Each time it looked more and more like him, until it looked better. And Gavin begins to actually be glad that the statue is dealing with his life instead of him having to do it. At the end of the story, the statue is at this point more beautiful than Gavin could hope to be, but it's also more human, as it cries in sadness at the loss of Gavin's father, who it sees as his father, and whose death never even seemed to bother Gavin at all. The story ends with Gavin simply wandering away across a busy road, allowing his doppelganger to continue living his life with cars grazing him. If the circumstances were right, maybe one of them would panic, swerve and run him down. But from now on, he belonged only to chance. That was an amazing story. I recommend you go read it because it's really cool. I don't know if I'd be scared of seeing my own doppelganger, but yeah, I thought this would be an interesting topic to cover and I had a lot of fun writing for this video. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you liked the little story that I came up with at the beginning. It's the first time that I've done something like that, so let me know what you think. I hope to get better at this whole writing thing, because I've been having a lot of fun doing it. Also, I wanted to say thank you so much for helping me reach, I think it was 140 subs at this point, since my last video. Before uploading the last video, which was the one on the Silent Hill cult, the Order, I had like 30 subs, I think, and now I have 140, so, you know, thank you so much. I've been having a blast with these last 3 essay type videos, from the research to the editing and even making the thumbnail. It's all really fun, so thank you so much for your support, and I hope to keep getting better at this. And with that, we reached the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. If you want to see more, subscribe. And yeah, have a good time. Adios.